Thank you, Visindu, for the divine praise. Before we kickstart the event, may we invite your attention to the following. This is actually pretty standard basic stuff, but we reiterate. The attendees are requested to keep their mics on mute mode all through the event. You are encouraged to switch off your cameras. The attendees are directed to type in their names and mail IDs in the chat box. We have planned the webcast on a runtime of around an hour with the presentation of the resource person for about 30 to 40 minutes, followed by the question and answer sessions. The participants can raise the queries on the Zoom, addressing the resource person directly by unmuting their mics, or they could type them in the chat box. The resource person will be addressing them at the end of her presentation. And this webinar is being recorded. Now may we introduce you to our college. The Srinarayana College for Women, situated in Kollam district of Kerala in South India, is affiliated to the University of Kerala and has a student strength of 2,500. Started in 1951, it stands as a triumphant institution offering quality education and maintaining consistently high academic standards with 16 departments offering 4 postgraduate programs and 2 research centers. The college envisages to expel the darkness of ignorance from the youth by shedding into them the light of true wisdom and instilling professional competency and sense of social justice, equipping them to be worthy, responsible citizens. We now play a teaser briefing you on our college. Thanks for watching. Moving on with the webinar. Marlene LaRose, the noted environmentalist, reminded us that we don't have to wait for the world to change to be part of changing the world. It was in this note that we have mooted the idea of the webinar on solid waste management, a most basic measure in effectively bringing a positive change to the world and to our lives. Solid waste management is one of the most pressing environmental challenges globally and has become a top priority in many countries. It is an area which needs awareness building and education. Webinars like this provide a valuable opportunity for us all to listen to experts in the area sharing their experiences. Today's webinar was conceived with this view in mind as a gesture of a humble measure to ensure that solid waste management techniques achieve its full potential by reaching large masses for the benefit of mankind. We hope you would have a fruitful and rewarding experience in the next few minutes. We could have started right away with the presentation part of the webinar, but it might not have been enough for the beauty of the occasion. To go further with the event, a formal welcome is on our procedure. May I now request Dr. Aswathy Sugunan, Head, Department of Home Science, to formally welcome you all to this webinar.
Respected Manager of Sri Narayana Colleges, Sri Vellappally, our beloved Principal, Dr. Nisha, Tharayil, IQAC Coordinator, Dr. Haralakshmi, Coordinator of the International Webinar Series Crossroads 2020, Dr. Chithra P G, Joint Coordinator, Dr. Aparna Das, Dr. Gopinathan, Faculty, Department of Physics, our esteemed Resource Person of the Day, Professor Angelique C. Rajan, faculties across various disciplines, and dear participants of the webinar, a very warm good afternoon to all. The Department of Home Science, in association with the IQAC, is delighted and honored to host a webinar as part of the International Webinar Series Crossroads 2020, organized by the Sri Narayana College for Women, Kollam. A webinar is a celebration of knowledge, and today's webinar addresses a significant area of solid waste management, which is the most vehemently discussed issue with significant implications in the present times and future. Solid waste management refers to the process of collecting and treating solid waste, and it assumes significance as an important measure in the protection of the environment and the health of the population. Effective management of solid waste is all about how it can be changed and used as a valuable resource. I hope that today's webinar inspires us with ideas around the ways that we can make our city a better place. Let me now move on with my duty of welcoming the dignitaries. Sri Vellappally, Manager Sri Narayana Colleges, is the patron of the webinar and has been continuously extending his support to the functioning of our college. On behalf of the Sri Narayana College for Women, Department of Home Science, and on my personal behalf, I extend a very respectful welcome to you, sir. I would now welcome our beloved Principal, Dr. Nisha Tharayil, who has always been very helpful and encouraging, guiding the activities of our department. On behalf of our department and on my own behalf, I extend a warm welcome to you, madam. The IQAC coordinator, the young and vibrant Dr. Haralakshmi VS, is very passionate about her work. I gladly welcome her to the webinar. I also welcome the vibrant IQAC team of our college to this webinar. The coordinator of the webinar series, Dr. Chithra P G, is one of the senior faculty members who carries out the responsibilities vested on her effectively. On behalf of our department and on my personal behalf, I extend a hearty welcome to you, madam. Joint coordinator of the webinar series, Dr. Aparna Das, is a bubbly enthusiast and always on the move. I heartily welcome her to this event. The cheerful Dr. Gopinathan, who diligently delivers the technical support and silently runs the show. I delightfully welcome him to this webinar. Our speaker of the day, Professor Angelique C. Rajan, joins us from the United Kingdom. She is the Professor of Urban Planning and Governance at the Henley Business School, University of Reading, United Kingdom. It is a great pleasure to have such a noted personality to address us this afternoon. On behalf of the Department of Home Science and IQAC, Sri Narayana College for Women, and all present here, I extend a very cordial welcome to you, madam. We are delighted to have a lot of faculties and researchers across various disciplines join us on this zone to participate in the webinar. An extra special word of welcome goes to each one of them who have taken the time out to be here this afternoon. I heartily welcome all the attendees who have virtually here with us and hope that the valuable messages you take from this webinar will be effectively put to practice. Once again, here is a hearty welcome, big and warm enough to encompass you all. Wishing you all a great time ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aswathy, for the warm welcoming words. Moving on. I feel happy and honored to introduce our esteemed resource person for today's webinar, Dr. Angelique C. Rajan, Professor, Urban Planning and Governance, University of Reading, UK. Professor Angelique C. Rajan, a distinguished personality in the field of education and research in the United Kingdom, has a very inspiring resume. After her master's degree in architecture, she went on to do a diploma in social science research methods from the School of City and Regional Planning, Cardiff University, UK, and later did a special postgraduate diploma in environmental management of human settlements from the Institute of Housing and Urban Development, Netherlands. She then completed her PhD from Cardiff University with a doctoral fellowship sponsored by the Ford Foundation. She later did her ESRC postdoc fellowship at Cardiff University, where she subsequently worked as a research fellow. She then joined the University of Reading and is presently continuing. Madam has researched a wide range of issues, including solid waste management, land management tools and techniques, school meals, local health provisions, bottom-up planning practices, multi-level governance, education, and responsible tourism practices. Besides numerous internal university funding, her research has been funded by the World Food Programme, Ford Foundation, USAID, and the Higher Education Academy of UK. Professor Rajan is of international repute and has given keynote addresses at the Heads of Schools meeting of the Association of European Schools of Planning, the 50th anniversary celebrations of the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, Norway, and at the annual colloquium of the Networks of Development Researchers in Wales, amongst many others. Geographically, her research has focused on India and the UK. She has also engaged with particular planning issues and practices in Sri Lanka, Lebanon, and Ghana. She has participated in consultations workshops coordinated by the Economic and Social Research Council and Arts and Humanities Research Council in India and is a member of the ESRC peer review panel. She is a regular reviewer of applications to the Newton Fund administered by the British Council and of research applications of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. Madam is elected as the Secretary General of the Association of European Schools of Planning for 2019-22. She is a Senior Fellow of the Higher Education Academy and one of the UK panelists for the Quality Recognition Programs in Planning Education across Europe, and is a reviewer for various National Teaching Awards of Higher Education Authority and the FLAIR CPD program of the university. She has also served as the Director of Studies for the Department of Real Estate and Planning. Professor Rajan is Managing Editor of Planning Theory, a top-ranking journal within the planning discipline. She has published extensively in international peer-reviewed journals within planning and development and is a recipient of 2 awards for her publications. Her work has been anthologized twice within both planning and organizational studies disciplines. With these words, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Angelique C. Rajan, who has graciously consented to address us this afternoon on solid waste management, a topic of global concern. Madam, the webinar zone is all yours now.
Thank you very much, Seena, for that very flattering description. I think we'll go straight into the seminar, but before that, I just want to thank you personally for inviting me and the Home Science Department at SN College for Women for inviting me today. So let me try and upload my presentation, and we'll take it from there. I hope it's visible now.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. So sorry. Okay. Okay, what we'll be talking about today. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this to work. Okay, so the topic today, of course, is solid waste management. And what we will talk about today, we'll start off by trying to understand what waste is. So what exactly is waste? If the audience would like to respond, could you type in your answers in the chat box? How would you try to answer that question of what is waste? Anything that is of no use, Priyanka. Okay, excellent. Any other replies of what is waste? Okay. Waste is unwanted things or useless things. No use, but used by others. Okay, excellent. We want to discard anything useless things. Yeah, unwanted materials. Okay, so there is an emphasis in your response on the use of things. So what I want to say is that waste is actually defined also as material at the wrong place and at the wrong time. So what that means is, what do we mean by wrong place? For instance, food discarded in the streets is objectionable waste, as we know. We don't want to see food lying around in the street. But food in the compost bin is not waste anymore. It becomes a resource for composting. And so that's the idea of waste being something that is in the wrong place. Similarly, paper, if you see floating around in public places, that is waste for us. But when it is pulped and repurposed into something else and used for substituting for trees, it is no longer waste. So it is the idea that something is waste only if it is in the wrong place. And also wrong time. So say a bus coupon, a ticket might be waste for us now. But for a collector, say 60 years down time, it may not be waste anymore. It is something that is collectible, and it's therefore of value. So it is something as mundane as a bus ticket or as a cinema ticket. For somebody who's collecting it, might be something of value, and things then tend to acquire value as you go down time, and things that stay sometimes take on more value before it falls down again. So actually the idea is that the use and value of waste varies across time, and it varies across where it is. It depends on where it is. So that is an idea around a way of thinking about waste, which then prompts us to think about, can we then reclaim value from waste by bringing it to a right place at the right time? And that is a way of thinking about waste that can be used to try and put in place solid waste management systems that bring waste at the right time to the right place. Okay, so today we are going to talk about what waste is, as we just did, and then I will go on to discuss the importance of waste management for the city. We will then discuss the general issues in waste management in the Global South, before selecting certain principles of waste management that can be used to put in place good solid waste management at a city level. Finally, I will finish off by discussing the governance arrangements of solid waste management, particularly focusing on Kerala. So we discussed what waste is. If we look again to one of the important things about municipal solid waste is to look at the composition of waste. This first figure gives you the composition of municipal waste in US in 2013. So what we can see there really is that food really is only 15% of the total municipal waste. A large proportion is paper. There's metals, there's glass, there's wood, rubber, leather, and so on, all of which, or most of which, can be recycled. So there is a strong impetus in the Western world because of the composition of waste. There's a strong push to recycle waste as much as possible. But compare that with waste in India, the composition of waste in India. So this, you can see that green portion is food waste. So waste characteristic, our waste characteristic in India is 80% is made up of food waste. So if we can find some way to tackle the food waste effectively, a lot of the solid waste problem can be addressed. It's an important distinction to keep in mind that the composition of waste is not the same everywhere. And waste management systems need to take this into consideration and put in place appropriate systems according to the waste profile that they have. Moving on. Okay, let's now quickly discuss the importance of waste management. So, what are the health benefits of good solid waste management? I'll give you 2 minutes to actually type in some of your answers in the chat box. So the question is, what are the health benefits of good solid waste management? Can I have some responses, please, in the chat box? Ensures good environmental conditions. Gayatri, yeah, decreases respiratory illness, reduces soil and water pollution, pollution-free environment. Okay. Avoids diseases, reduces disease conditions, gets organized. Okay. So the question is really, what are the health benefits? Okay. So the focus is on the health benefits in this slide. So firstly, it prevents, as many of you have already pointed out, it prevents direct impacts on the human body. And that means infections. And as some of you have already pointed out, it prevents respiratory diseases, skin irritations. It also affects reproductive health in the sense that living in a waste-intensive environment can affect the reproductive health of the mother as well as the baby. It causes air and water contamination, which can then directly impact on the body. And of course, we know it can cause food poisoning. So these are the direct impacts on the human body. It also impacts on things that carry diseases. So not directly impacting on the human body, but indirectly impacting because it allows for other things that can carry diseases. So it is a breeding ground for stray dogs, rats, cows, mosquitoes, houseflies, bugs, etc. And it can lead to what is known as urban zoonosis, which is what we are going through COVID times now. This is one of the manifestations of zoonosis. That is, things that mutate and then can cause a problem for humans. So waste management directly impacts on the human body. It also affects disease vectors that carry disease and therefore cause so it has an indirect impact. Finally, it also contributes to mental and psychological stress. So none of us want to live in an environment where close to, say, a waste dump. Okay? So it causes environmental stress if we are always subject to seeing as soon as if you find a waste fly tipping in front of your house, you would try as much as possible to get it removed. Yeah, because it is a source of environmental stress. It causes sensory pollution. So it's a visual assault. It's and for that reason, it causes mental and psychological distress as well. So what now are the environmental benefits of good solid waste management? We talked about the health benefits. We said it has got direct impact, indirect impact, and it has got mental health impacts. What about the environmental issues? Some of you already have answered this question in my previous, so I'm going to move on to say we know that it has a direct impact on pollution. So pollution means it can pollute the air, water, it can pollute the soil as well, because you don't know what is being, if it is heavy metals that being dumped in the waste, that can pollute the soil on which it is lying. So soil, it can pollute food, and it can cause sensory pollution, as I said earlier. So that is a direct impact on the environment, which then in turn affects us. It also affects the sustainability of cities. How? It can cause drought, for instance. So if you have a water source and that water source gets contaminated, you don't have access to good water anymore. And that causes effectively a drought in your area. It can cause flooding. How? Because it can fall into open drains, which most of our cities have open drains. So when waste falls into it, it blocks up drains and it can cause localized flooding. It can cause fire, because we know waste can ignite by its own, and it's a common sight on landfill sites to find fires in dump sites and landfill sites. And of course, it has an impact on economic and social sustainability of the cities. A good recycling system, a good recovering system in the solid waste management makes the city more sustainable. And also it can give rise to jobs and employment to quite a number of people. It has also a global impact in sense of climate change and global sustainability. Because the more we recycle, the more we recover material and energy from waste, the less we have to use new resources. It also contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. For instance, in India, the dump yards of India contribute 50 to 60% of the methane that India produces. 50 to 60% of the methane, which is a harmful gas, comes exclusively from dump yards. So it's a major contributor to global warming, and it also can cause loss of habitats and biodiversity in cities. Okay, so now let's move on to discuss issues in waste management. So the first issue, of course, is storage of waste. Often we find that adequate facilities for storage of waste is absent, be it in houses or be it in commercial establishments. Waste storage per se is absent. There is no bin. So what happens then is, if you don't have a compound within your own property, what happens is, as soon as waste is produced, it is just crumpled up and thrown wherever you can find place. And that ends up, waste ends up in public spaces as a result. So we get this kind of situation when there is no proper storage in households for waste. So first step actually in the waste management process is for every household to have an adequate storage of waste. And when it ends up in these kind of situations in public spaces, that then can enter drains, and it causes all kinds of hardships that we just discussed on health and as well as environment. So the second issue around waste is waste segregation. Again, in most developing countries, this is very limited. So most Western countries have these kind of systems, in whether it is in offices or most households have a segregating system where the food waste has got to be separated from the recyclable waste and the green waste. So in most developing countries, this is not in place. And when waste is not segregated at source, what is the problem then? That then means if you got to deal with the food waste that we saw earlier, which makes up 80% of the waste, if that food waste is not separated, then somebody has got to sort it after some time, somewhere down the line. So maybe at the city level, maybe at the neighborhood level, somebody has got to do the sorting. So that means, again, labor, you have to pay somebody, you have to pay a workforce to actually sort the waste and to recover recyclables. So that then leads to a great higher cost of recycling. So waste that you have to pay somebody to get, say, glass out of it or paper out of it, and then you need to sell it to an industry. It commands less cost because you have already had to spend money to recover the recyclables from it. So if waste is not segregated at source, it is more expensive to do recycling. And also the other issue is whatever is recovered is also not valued highly. If paper is mixed with food waste and then you try to sell the paper, of course it is not going to get the same value as if it was separated in the first instance and you are trying to sell dry, good quality paper that has not been spoiled. So the value of the recyclable material decreases, and you have to spend extra for the sorting to happen. So good solid waste management system has to have storage of waste and segregation of waste, both at the level of the household. It has to be done at the household level. The final issue is if it's not sorted at the source, somebody tends to be marginalized sections of the population who have to pick their way through the waste and try to segregate it somewhere down the line. It is something that can easily be sorted by actually segregating at household, so that there is no need for marginalized sections to do this kind of almost dirty and unhealthy work of segregating the waste later. So we discussed storage of waste, we discussed segregation of waste. After segregation of waste, that is at the household level, what then happens after, if you have stored waste and segregated waste, what then happens is you tend to take the waste to a primary collection point from where the city might pick up the waste. Now, this is a photograph actually from Cochin in Kerala, and it's a concrete bin. It's a concrete bin is a place where most households are expected to dump their waste. Now, what is the problem in this? The problem is here is that waste is actually touching the ground. Okay? And a good waste handling system will prevent waste ever falling on the ground. As we saw, it is a potential source for pollution, and we don't want it lying around in the ground. We have to put in place a waste management system that does not need waste to actually be on the ground. Okay, we'll come to how to do it later on. The second problem with this concrete bin situation, of course, is how can you get the waste out of it and into a transportation system? You actually have to manually handle it. Somebody's got to come up with a spade, scoop up the waste, manually put it into a bucket or something, and then take the bucket to a transporting vehicle and then dump it into the transportation vehicle. So that means quite a lot of work around these primary collection points. Okay, so there's two problems: waste on the ground, and it requires manual handling. Again, something to be avoided. It's a potential source of pollution, so we don't want people actually needing to handle waste that is harmful. Okay. And the other issue, of course, is when you get situations like that, you get situations like this, which quickly follows. You get cattle there, you get stray dogs, and I know the stray dogs have been a huge problem in Kerala. You get rats, and we saw all of these can be vectors for diseases. So primary collection points have to be designed in a way that it does not require, if at all it is needed, it needs to be designed as a way that there is no waste on the ground and it does not require manual handling. Okay, from there, what happens then? The waste then is transported by some means. This is a cart, and that is a truck. By some means, the waste from the collection point is transported either to a disposal site or to a secondary collection point. So both of these transportation systems, you can see it doesn't look good. And it's not just that it doesn't look good, it again requires handling. How can you load waste onto either of these transportation systems without actually handling the waste? Somebody has got to scoop things up and then put it on these systems in order to be transported. So both these transportation systems are not good because it requires manual handling. The other issue is there's an attempt, a feeble attempt to cover some of that waste being transported. But it is absolutely no guarantee. As you can see, just below the truck, there's waste lying around. Because there is no guarantee that when the truck starts to move, the waste will just start to fly around. When it starts to fly around, there are people in our crowded streets, there are people all around, and the population at large in the cities are exposed to waste. So this way of transportation is also therefore problematic. It requires hygiene, it requires handling, and it is not hygienic for waste handlers and the city population. Okay, so after transportation, it goes mostly into transfer stations. Now this is from Middle East, but it goes into this kind of a place. And we have, in Kerala, I did not have a photograph of it, but we have transfer stations in most cities. So it goes into a transfer day where all these waste is dumped. And at the transfer stations, that the rag pickers come and try to sort through this waste. You can see the people trying to, the waste is dumped on that table there, and people are trying to sort it into and trying to take out what can be recycled, and the recycled material is being placed in those bags. Okay. In Kerala, mostly instead of a table, it's just dumped on the ground again. So again, it is waste touching the ground, and once it's put on the ground, it again has to be scooped up to be transported to the dump yard. So you get multiple handling of waste. You get handling of waste at the collection point, then you get handling of waste at the transfer stations before it even reaches the disposal situation. And finally, after the transportation, whatever can be recovered from the waste is recovered at the transfer stations, and then it is taken to the final dump yard. I use the word dump yard because that's exactly what it is. It is just waste being dumped. It is hardly, as far as I know, there isn't many landfill sites in India. The term landfill sites are used instead of dump yards, but it is not a landfill site. A landfill site requires proper lining of the dumping pit. It requires gas recovery operations. It requires leachate removal. It requires all sorts of technological things to be in place for it to be a landfill site. This does not happen. And what happens is waste is dumped in some place, and it is often sometimes covered with mud to prevent it from flying away with the wind. And sometimes it is also topped with lime in a half-hearted attempt to make it, to disinfect it. In the picture, you can also see towards the right of the picture of the dump yard, you can see water there. So this dump yard, it is from, I must say it's quite a while ago, but it must be around 10 years ago, this photograph. But at that point, this is from Kerala. The second photograph is from Kerala. Waste was being dumped in a place which is very close to water. So what we then get is the leachate from waste, that is the decaying water, the water that comes out when materials decay, that just goes straight into the backwaters or the rivers or whatever is the water body that is near. So we have direct water pollution happening as a result. So we have then issues around starting from the household, through the collection system, through to the transportation system, the transfer stations, and the dump yards. There are issues that work throughout. So in order for a good waste management system to be in place, we need to work quite comprehensive. We have to work across the system. We can't just focus on just finding a place to dump waste. We can't just work just on trying to get rid of collection points or just distributing buckets to households, because it is only one small part of the solution, and it cannot create a whole waste management, proper waste management system. Okay, so how do we then move on from there to get to designing something that will work in developing country context? So let me just start by just reminding you of some normative principles of good solid waste management that I happened to mention along while I was talking around the previous slides. So first, one of the principles that I mentioned was no waste on ground. Okay, as far as possible, waste should not touch ground. So that is one guiding principle. Second principle I mentioned was no multiple handling of waste. You should not have to multiple manual. I should have added manual handling of waste. So there should not be a need for people to come in and scoop waste and handle waste all the time. Okay, so we see now how these principles do not often work generally in India, and not just in India, in a lot of countries in the global south. So when we go to thinking about what kind of a system can do this, can maintain these principles and yet achieve a good waste management system effectively and cost effectively, particularly in a developing country context. So that's something that we will go on to discuss. But before that, I just want to introduce you to the waste hierarchy. You might be already familiar, I'm sure you will be familiar with this. It was first introduced by the European Union Waste Framework Directive in 1975. Okay, so what this says is waste should be as far as possible reduced. Okay, as far as possible, reduce waste generation. Out of what you cannot reduce, so there are some ways that it's inevitable. You can't make, or it'll be difficult not to produce any waste at all. So try and reduce it as much as possible. Out of that, out of what is left, what waste is generated, try and reuse as much as possible. Clothes, for instance, you might be able to reuse it. There could be other things, materials that can be reused in different for different purposes. If you cannot, after having reused as much as possible, then try and recycle. Recycle means you change it into a different thing. So say glass can be recycled into new glass, paper can be recycled into new paper. So try and recycle things as much as possible. And if that is not after that, try and recover what is not possible. After having recycled, reduced, reused, recycled, out of what is left, try and recover, and you recover material as well as energy. So it's not just material recovery, try and recover energy as well from what is left. And only the very small bit that you can't do anything with needs to be disposed of. Okay, so this waste hierarchy, as I said, was first proposed by the European Union Waste Framework Directive in 1975. So it's been around for quite a while, for 35 years almost. Now, which stages in this works best in India? Can you use the chat box and give me what your impression is? I just want to know what you think. Out of all of those stages, the 5 stages, which works best? Reuse, recycle, and dispose. Okay? Through recycling can be benefited secondary. Okay, reuse works best. Okay, Athira says reuse works best. Yeah. Reuse, recycling, reuse. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, thank you. So a lot of people, a lot of you mentioned that reuse and recycle works better. Yes, and that's true. In most developing countries, it is the reuse and recycle portion that works best. And let me remind you of the waste composition in developing countries. We saw that it was hugely food waste, and that is also a part of, because most other things are reused and recycled. So it does not find its way into the waste stream because it gets reused and recycled earlier. So what we find in municipal solid waste is mainly food waste, therefore. Okay, so I'm now going to introduce something that I'm going to summarize rather about what we have discussed normatively. So we said that what happens at the moment also is we get segregation, sometimes happening, sometimes not happening, most often not happening at household level. But normatively, the idea is that segregation must happen at household level. We then conceive that primary collection must be organized at neighborhood level. So all households in a neighborhood have got one primary collection point, one concrete bin area where you can go and put your waste in. And then secondary collection is the transportation from those bins to the city, to the transfer stations where waste is sorted, or to disposal sites. That should be done at city level because the city owns the transportation lorries and so on. They organize the pickup of waste from these bins, and therefore it is organized at city level. And disposal is again organized at city level. Sometimes it could be at regional level, but mostly it is at city. And in Kerala especially, it tends to be at city level. So this is somewhat, it looks like a whirlpool, isn't it? So we have household level, particularly present in the reduce, reuse, recycle parts of the waste hierarchy. Yeah, the neighborhood level present more in the transportation dispose part of it, and the city level also working in the transportation disposal part of it. So what we have is a model that is linear through scale. So you start with the household level and you just work. The waste actually starts at the household level, it travels to the neighborhood level, and finally ends up in the city level dump site. So it's a linear progression. The waste actually goes through, in the waste management system, it goes through different levels and it ends up at the city level disposal site. It starts at the household level, ends at the city level disposal site. So I've called this kind of a system as a whirlpool model because it looks like a whirlpool. So what are the problems with this model then? I've argued that there are significant problems with this model, especially for developing countries. It is a model that you find most, not just in developing countries, but in developed countries as well. It is the most common model. So first issue is the user engagement. It is very difficult to sustain user engagement in reduction of waste, in segregation of waste. For say, cities have tried time and again. I don't know if any of you are involved with waste management issues, but if you are, you would know that it has been at least portrayed as something very difficult to achieve, that people are not interested in segregation. They would rather just collect it collect it all together and dump it somewhere, and then it's not their problem. It is the waste is outside their household and it's not their problem anymore. So it's very difficult to get user engagement. The solution that is often offered for this is that it can be it needs public awareness campaigns. Of course, it does need public awareness campaign, but it is not. We have seen in practice that it is often not enough to sustain user engagement. Space limitations. So waste from all of the households in the city actually come to the disposal site. And that means quite a lot of waste. If you're dealing with a city of, say, I don't know, 10, 20 lakhs, that kind of waste, when it gets generated, it all ending up in one place. Where do we have the land to actually dispose the waste? Yeah. And first of all, the land is very expensive. In a state like Kerala, it is very difficult to find land at a good price. So expensive land is one issue, But more than that is who will allow a waste disposal site to be sited near their homes. And in a state like Kerala, which is almost populated throughout, we don't have large expanses of land with no population. It is very, very difficult to find waste disposal sites and to locate one. And I know cities have really struggled with it. It has led to huge public protest as well, citing of disposal sites. So that is potentially a huge issue. So this model collects all the waste and tries to dispose it in a land that is non-existent, really. There is also loss of energy recovery opportunities because, as I said, we don't have landfill sites. What we have is dump yards. So in these dump yards, there is hardly any waste. There is absolutely no, I can say, waste recovery, energy recovery taking place. So that all of the energy that is in the waste gets wasted. Of course, it causes environmental problems. We dealt with that. We saw how waste disposal sites can be not very well located. And the key thing to remember is that there is really no economies of scale in solid waste management. Some things, when you accumulate it, it leads to efficiencies in dealing with it. That is not the case with waste. The moment you accumulate waste, it becomes a hazard. It becomes unstable. You have to actually deal with it immediately. So it becomes a really potential huge problem the moment you accumulate waste. Yet this model, that is the whirlpool model, what it does exactly that. It accumulates waste. Okay, so this is the major critique against the whirlpool model. Now, before going into let's start to think about what will work then. We have looked into all of the problems. I think we understand quite intuitively and as well. And now we know also about the specific issues in each of these waste management, ways of managing waste. So it is quite often that countries in the global south might look to the global north to try to see how this has been solved in the global north. The global north also would promote ideas from that work here. I'm in the UK now, and that works in the UK might be promoted in other places as a good, because it works here well, then why wouldn't it work well in the developing countries, or say in a place like Kerala? So I want to discuss why it will not work. So firstly, we saw the nature of waste is different. So we saw that food waste is really only a very small portion of municipal solid waste in the developed world. We, on the other hand, in Kerala, have a huge 80% of our waste is food waste. That has got two implications. First implication is it will decay fast. Okay, it absolutely will decay fast because it is food waste. Second, it has very limited recycling options. It's not like having paper where you can recycling it. The recycling options out of food waste is very limited. The second issue is, so the nature of waste is different, and we have to bear that in mind. The collection frequency is different. So in Kerala, we have a moist, humid, warm climate, warm, hot even climate. And that means waste will decay very fast, especially if you have 80% food waste. So within a day, if the waste is not taken, it starts to decay, starts to cause all of the problems we discussed with earlier. So we have to have a collection, a good waste management system will have to have waste collection daily, every day. Here in the UK, I put waste collection here is once a week. And once a week, there is a collection of recyclables. And the next week, it's collection of general waste, that is non-recycling waste. So actually the waste collection of one particular kind of waste happens only once in 2 weeks. We cannot have that in a place like Kerala with our composition of waste and our climate conditions. Here waste does not decay. It takes, after 1 week also it's cold country, so it does not decay so fast. And to operate a waste management system where waste has to be collected every day is very expensive, which is not the case here. So you need so many more trucks. Because all these trucks have to go out every day. While it's in the UK, you can operate a system with fewer trucks because the same truck goes to different places on different days. So you need only less number of trucks. The systems in developed countries tend to be technology heavy. For instance, you have, say, automated transportation in solid waste management. So in my house here, a waste is generated. I put it out in a bin, large bin that this council has given us, and an automated truck comes in, lifts the bin, dumps it into a truck, no manual handling, no waste on ground, and it is transported off. So it is an automated transportation system. So when we have an everyday collection frequency, it is very, very resource intensive to have trucks of that nature, of automated trucks that will collect the waste and take it every day. So of course, if we can afford it, well and good, but we can't afford it. Most municipalities cannot afford it. Land. Availability say, I'm talking from the UK, so here is much better. Yes, it is always a problem. Siting of landfill sites is always a problem. But it is better because there are large tracts of land with no population nearby. So it is possible to find land that can be with no people around it. And often, instead of city-level dump sites, the landfill sites are designated at a regional level. So, number of councils contribute to that landfill sites, and those landfill sites are often situated where no other population, there's no people around for the most part. And also, there are strong planning systems which have a major input on land price. In Kerala, almost anywhere is developable. We now have a system where you can't develop on paddy lands, but until very recently, even that was possible. So you could develop almost anywhere in Kerala. But in the UK, for instance, it is absolutely, you can't develop except on particular land parcels. And that means land is available at a lower cost when there is no population around them. So land availability situation is vastly different. Governance systems tend to be better streamlined here. And generally, there is better access to public funds as well. So all of those reasons makes it very difficult for us to actually look and try and import models from the global north. So why? I think we can also still devise our own SWM. And how? Why? We do have our own strengths. For instance, yes, we have the nature of waste is different. We have large amount of food waste, but that allows us for a different environmental disposal system. We have already developed, we don't need to develop it from scratch. We already have technologies for composting and biogas treatment, which you can just take it off the shelf. You can just buy a system and you can install it. And a lot of agencies, sometimes I think some councils, I'm not so current in terms of what is happening in which councils where, but I know that there are certain corporations and municipalities that are promoting this by subsidizing some of the biogas treatment plant purchase. So these technologies are available. We don't have to wait for it to be developed. We have quite a strong decentralized system of governance in place, in the sense that municipalities and corporations, if they want to, can do a lot. So we we have councillors and community leaders that are quite powerful often. I studied as a waste management practice in one ward in Cochin, must be around 8 years ago, I think, which was fantastic. And that was really promoted by the councillor. So if the councillors and community leaders wish, there is a space for them to act. In sometimes there is no space for them to act even if they wish to. But that is not exactly the situation in Kerala. There is a space if powerful councillors and community leaders want to act. There are, yes, it's difficult to designate dump yards, but there is still public land available within our cities. There is land associated with community-based facilities. For instance, there's markets, there are town halls, there are wedding halls, there are schools, colleges. These are all quite well distributed in cities. I know that the Kudumbashree-based collection system is already operating in some places, and they are operating quite well, I think, in some places. There are systems of recycling paper, glass, etc. already in place in most places. So you know where to take the paper, the old newspapers, where you can sell the old newspapers. So these are things that already exist in Kerala. So we need a different model of solid waste management that builds upon these existing strengths. So what I have proposed, and what I call this as an alternate fractal model. So we saw the linear model, the whirlpool model, which actually just waste is produced at the household level and ends up at the city level. Here, what is being proposed is waste is produced at the household level and must end at the household level. Similarly, waste that is produced at the neighborhood level must end at the neighborhood level. And the same thing for the city. Anything that is produced at that level must end at that level. So we have reduce, reuse, recycle, recovery, and disposal options, which are the components of the waste hierarchy happening at every scale. Okay, so let's see how this will happen then. So this is the alternate level. The household level, waste is generated, of course, and then reduce and reuse, try and reduce waste as much as possible, and reuse of waste as much as possible. Reuse clothes, reuse other things, containers, waste containers, ice cream boxes, all of these are reused. Jam jars, all of these we tend to reuse in Kerala. So waste and reduce and reuse through community mobilization and awareness. Segregation and storage must happen in households, in containers. So it could be any containers. It's not so expensive to buy a bucket or to designate a container for it. And then we know that these are things that are already happening to some extent. Recyclables are being collected either by rack pickers, or people tend to take it to a center where it can be recycled. Now, the difference now here is we need also to promote household level energy and material recovery. I personally prefer a biogas thing only because, for two reasons. I'll explain that in a minute. But energy and material recovery through a small household level biogas plant, because you can get gas as well as slurry from it. Yeah, the gas, it tends to, for a household of 4, it tends to produce 1.5 to 2 hours of cooking gas, which is, I think, most households, it tends to be sufficient for most of the cooking to be done. Yeah. So a biogas plant gives rise to biogas, and it gives us fertilizer as in terms of slurry. For the composting, why I say this is better than composting is composting does not give us energy recovery. we cannot get back energy from composting. Second, you need to have more space for composting because it needs to set for at least 45 days. And during that 45, so you need to have at least 2 sets of containers that you can empty your waste to. Yeah. So due to those 2 reasons, and most importantly, that the fact that the option for energy recovery is absent. So you get here from the generation through disposal into the biogas and slurry thing, you get almost 80% of more than 80% of the waste is gone now, if this can be practiced at household level. So you get only 20% of the waste that needs to travel outward. We know then, let's look at the practical difficulties. We know that not every household has got space for it. For maybe a biogas plant doesn't take much space, by the way. It can be easily put in a 3 or 4 cent or even a 3 cent house. It literally takes around, I don't know, around 1 meter by 1 meter square. So it depends on the size that you go for, of course, but it doesn't take much space. But even so, there may be households where that is not possible. There could be lifestyles where people are just so busy that they just do not want to engage with the biogas plant or looking after the biogas plant. That's also a reality. 2 people working very busy jobs, that can happen. We could have flats where a household level or flat level biogas is not possible. So for all of these things, these options, there needs to be also a collection system in place. So it is a choice for an individual household to either put their own, if they have the facility and the time. It doesn't require much time, but if they can do it, they put in a biogas plant, and the reward they get from it is that they get energy. They get energy and they get the fertilizer. So that is a much stronger incentive for adopting this than just a public awareness campaign. You cannot operate a biogas plant without segregation. You can't put metals into a biogas plant, of course. You can only put food waste into it. So definitely because of that, segregation will happen because only food waste can go into a biogas plant. Again, it is much more effective than just a public awareness campaign. And because there is a reward at the end of it, you're getting 1.5 hours of gas is a bonus. And whatever cannot be recycled can be. Usually, you sell your recyclables you sell the waste paper to a rag picker or a recycling person. But here, I'm suggesting that we can, if it is non-recyclable things, maybe the person has to pay to dispose it. Okay. Now, at the neighborhood level, waste can come from street and public spaces, and it can come from the collection system from households not having a biogas plant. So if all households do not have a biogas plant, there is a collection system, then waste comes to the neighborhood level because it's a region of households that is collected. So waste can be generated from these collection systems, from street and public spaces. And the suggestion is, again, the collecting team, whether it's a Kudumbashree unit or any other unit, they recover. I mentioned I studied a case in Cochin a while ago. There, the collection system was a group of party workers that the councillor had assembled together. So it can be anybody who is collecting the waste. They recover the remaining recyclables. They're segregated recyclables. And I'm suggesting that there should be a biogas plant at the neighborhood level. So this can be situated like somewhere like in a market, for instance. If there is a neighborhood market, it's a good place. Or if there is a wedding hall, because there is a huge amount of food waste produced there, it is not an issue because there is absolutely no smell in this case. And usually they are quite thankful. In the case that I studied, actually waste was being traded, because people who were running a small scale food unit, household level food unit, they were asking for waste from others because they would get their fuel for free. So in a situation where, like in a wedding hall situation, I don't envisage there being a problem, because they would get the food for cooking quite from the waste. So it is a way of disposing of as much as waste as possible at the neighborhood level. So the waste that is generated at the household level, only some of it even reach the neighborhood level. And if once it reaches the neighborhood level, again, we are trying to remove the waste from that level by a biogas plant at the neighborhood level, appropriately situated. And only those things that can't be disposed in a biogas plant at neighborhood level and can't be sold is disposed to the city level. At the city level, again, the waste generation is from major roads and major public spaces. Again, it can be by appointed rack pickers, and we can also have a biogas plant at the recovery station. That means we need a very, very, very smaller landfill site. And what we need is really a site that holds 3 or 4 huge biogas plants, or 2 or 3 biogas plants. And because the waste that comes to the city level is so much less now, because more than 80% of the waste is removed from the system. So we don't need this massive expanses of land for siting, and we don't even need the kind of landfill sites that we have, because all of the harmful things goes into the biogas plants. So this is what are the advantages of this alternate fractal model? So it's one way to say that yes, it could work, but what are the additional factors? Why would this model be more desirable? So I would suggest one is that it is inherently more stable. Why? Suppose we imagine at the moment, if the waste collection system fails, the whole city collapses. So we had an instance, I think it was in 2008, 2009, where the city of Cochin, and I'm sure in Trivandrum and other places also it would have happened, where waste management system just collapses because you can't take it to the dump site because of public protest, you don't know where to dump it, and no waste is collected. The whole city paralyzes. In this kind of system, suppose a biogas plant does not work. All you have to do is take it to the next biogas plant. It is only a local failure that happens. And within a city thing, there may be, I don't know, thousands of household level biogas plants. There may be hundreds of neighborhood plants, and maybe a couple of, not all of these 3 things together are going to fail. And if it is sited properly, there's not going to be an objection, because the people who benefit from the biogas plant, waste suddenly starts to become a tradable thing. Waste starts to become valuable because it gives rise to energy, it gives you cooking gas, and it subsidizes your business costs. So therefore, it is much more stable, and it can only lead to local failure. It is easily manageable at each level because there is less pollution entering at that level. Instead of accumulating waste and making the whole thing unstable, I would suggest disposing it at each level so that at the next level, there is only very little waste coming in. It is resource efficient because at all stages, the waste hierarchy is exercised, and therefore we have almost complete resource recovery taking place. I think it's also financially viable because when there is a collection system, of course, the people have to pay for the waste to be collected. So if it operates on a negotiated basis rather than a top-down imposed manner, if it is operated on a negotiated basis, it can become financially viable. You get gas out of it as well. people are consulted and individual preference is respected, because you can't impose that everybody create their own compost plant or create their own biogas plant. It is an option. If they don't do it, they have to pay for the collection system. And if they do it, they get the gas for free. So I think it's therefore operationally sustainable as the benefits of the system reaches the generator. And of course, because waste is treated almost simultaneously with its generation, there's no time for it to decay. The waste is produced, it goes straight into the biogas plant within the day. And therefore, it doesn't accumulate, it doesn't lead to any, and there is no need of waste touching the ground at all. Because if waste is segregated, stored in buckets, these buckets go straight into the biogas plant at the neighborhood level, and there it gets disposed. So it is much more, it respects the caveat of multiple handling, no waste on ground, and so on. So I've detailed out all of these arguments in that publication. If you are interested to hear more, perhaps that's where you could go to for more details about it. And that's it. Thank you from me. There are any, happy to take any questions if there are any.
Yeah, the session is now open for queries. I think we are running past the scheduled time, ma'am. So we would quickly run through a few questions raised in the chat box. The first one goes like this: what are the modern techniques for managing municipal solid waste?
Modern, depends on what you think is modern, because in developing countries, incineration tends to be used. Again, you have to go back into the nature of waste, because in a situation where you have lots of paper, of course, incinerator will work. In a situation where 80% of your waste is food waste, incinerator will not work. Why? Because in order to burn food waste, you will have to add fuel. You cannot take energy out because you have to add energy in order to burn it. So incinerator is not a good option for the waste characteristics in places like Kerala.
Okay, the next question is, how can we manage the food waste management? Are there any innovative ideas or policy options?
Food waste, as I said, food waste, I was mentioning the biogas plant, and of course, composting is also an option, but you will not get energy out of it. So the energy is lost. All you will get is the material. And it's more about actually having these options at simultaneously at different scales. That is important.
Thank you, ma'am. An attendee has shared a concern that though everyone desires to design smart cities, they aren't quite aware of the 3 R's. So how do we make them aware of it?
They are not aware of what? Sorry.
Ma'am, the 3 R's, the reuse.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, the 3 R's. Yes, from my point of view, I think the 3 R's is not the message to be given to the public. In my view, these are principles that are to be used in when people design the system of waste management. The message that needs to go to the public is segregation of waste, storage of waste, reduce waste as much as possible, reuse it, and either use the biogas. That it make the message simple, make it practical, and make it something that people can relate to. So an idea such as the 3 R's sounds kind of beyond their practical life, even though each of those components are very much part of what households do. It's much better to speak to them at the language of what happens in a household. So the 3 R's is something to be done by the, say, municipality who is trying to design a system of solid waste management. They need to know about it. And the messaging, there's a whole series of studies around communication of things and how you get people to obey things. And it is in talking to people and the lives that they lead that it is the best way to promote something, I think.
Okay, ma'am. The next question goes, how are we to reduce the multiple handling and solid waste disposal?
Like I said, if there is a biogas plant in most households, then those households are not even putting out waste. So there is no way multiple handling, because it's only the person who is taking the waste from the household to the biogas plant in their own household. So there's no other handling of waste. At the neighborhood level, it is a collection team alone, because they're taking the waste, collecting it, and they are just taking it to the biogas plant at the neighborhood level. There's no other handling of waste. Same thing at the city level as well. So it is by making sure that the disposal arrangements work from the household to the neighborhood and at the city level simultaneously that we can reduce it.
Yeah, another attendee asks, are there any ways that you suggest for waste management in the current pandemic scenario?
Yeah, that's a completely different ball game, because we are now talking about contaminated waste and disposal of medical waste, medical contaminated waste. It is a different, entirely different scenario, especially in a situation where the normal waste material handling is not already in place. It can be a huge risk and a huge challenge. So I guess what I'm saying is that we need to first focus on getting the basic structure in place and instituting a system of waste management that works as a base. And then the COVID adds a layer of complexity on it. At the moment, that basic system itself is not in place. So the problems only get compounded at the moment.
And the last question is, ma'am, should solid waste management be included in the school or college curriculum?
I think definitely at school. I think the importance of reuse and recovery, reuse, recycle, recovery is definitely has to be placed in at the school level. And in most countries, actually in the UK especially, it is so much a part of what gets taught in schools. I mean, how to be a good citizen, or how to be a good socially aware person forms part of the curriculum. I would be surprised if it is not already taught in Kerala. It depends on which syllabus, and because there are many that is followed. But I suppose it will be covered somewhere. But I think instituting practical projects such as, say, starting a biogas unit at the school for, especially when there are school meals being prepared, it can easily be done, and children could be encouraged to dump their waste food into the biogas plant and things like that. Practical projects that just streamline this kind of way of thinking. The feeling of responsibility for the waste one produces is a good thing to have right from school itself.
Yes, ma'am. I think that covers all. We are indeed happy to get a handful of questions, and it's a great thing and a sign of engagement. And Madam has been highly responsive to all of them and has answered all the questions. So we trust we have done full justice to all those attendees who have raised the questions. Now, thank you, Professor Rajan, for your well-delivered presentation through a very engaging session. You walked us through various effective ways to manage solid waste. I particularly like the way you have compressed your speech into a few key points. I'm sure that all the participants have taken note of your suggestions and will be initiating the actions at their level. A big thank you, Madam.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Seena. Thank you to the department as such for home science. I hope, yeah, I was, as you know, Seena, I was quite reluctant because I was not sure how a planner would fit into the home science curriculum. But you managed it very well by suggesting certain lines of. Lines on which the presentation could be modeled. So thank you for that.
Thank you, ma'am, and please hold on. We're now coming to the close of the event, and I now call upon Dr. Sandhya, Faculty, Department of Home Science, to propose the vote of thanks.
Respected Manager of SN Colleges, Sri Vellapalli Nadeshni, Principal Dr. Nisha, Tharayil, Coordinator of the webinar series, Dr. Chithra P G, IQAC Coordinator, Dr. Harilakshmi BS, Head of the Department of Home Science, Dr. Aswathy Sugunan, and all the participants. A very warm and lovely good afternoon to all. I deem it a great honor to propose the vote of thanks to all who have helped us in making this webinar such a resounding success. First and foremost, I memorize the blessings of Almighty in the smooth conduct of this webinar. I take this opportunity to place on record our heartfelt gratitude to our manager, Sri Vellapalli Nadeshni, for the support and inspiration rendered for organizing this webinar. An event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheels started rolling weeks ago. It requires planning and a bird's eye for details. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated faculties in the committee of webinar series. Our principal, Dr. Nisha Tharayil, was the backbone of our endeavor, and on behalf of the Department of Home Science, I express our profound thanks to you, ma'am, for the perfect logistic support and guidance. On behalf of the Department of Home Science, I express a deep sense of gratitude to the Resource Person of the Day, Professor Angelique C. Rajan, for gracing the webinar with a thought-provoking and interesting address on solid waste management, the need of the hour. I hope all the participants have truly benefited and inspired with your views of solid waste management, and putting it into practice will make the world a better place to live. Thanks are due to the coordinator of the webinar series, Dr. Chithra P G, for the timely advice. My deep sense of appreciation to the vibrant IQAC coordinator, Dr. Harilakshmi B, and her team, and dedicated joint coordinator of the webinar series, Dr. Amarnath Das. A big thank you to our head of the department, Dr. Aswathy Sugunan, for the efforts she has put in for successfully organizing this webinar. Thanks are due to the faculty members of the Department of Home Science for the cooperation rendered. I especially thank Dr. Deepaknam, faculty in physics, for extending the technical support. I thank all who directly or indirectly helped us in the execution of this webinar. Finally, I thank all the participants for their patient listening and active participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandhya Suresh. Sometimes the smallest things take up the most room in our heart. We are deeply moved by the overwhelming response you have given to this webinar. We have marked close to 220 attendees in this zone, and we are happy to have gathered an interesting audience. And we conclude this evening with the hope that you would take back with you a strong but simple message from this event. The message is, together we can be a force for good. Together we can change this world. Now let's extend our arms and embrace a promising future. The best is yet to come. Thank you. Thank you all.
Hello, Ms. Seena Gopinathan. Hello, Dr. Seena Gopinathan. Hello.